February 15, 1943, Berlin, Germany. The winter snow fell in thick, silent flakes outside the Grand Wilhelmstrasse apartment as Colonel Friedrich Steiner adjusted his dress uniform before the gilt-edged mirror. His son, 12-year-old Klaus, watched from the doorway, small fingers tracing invisible patterns on the polished oak frame. The colonel believed today would mark a new chapter for their diminished family, a chance to restore what had been lost when his wife had passed away 3 months earlier. He could not have known that his carefully arranged introduction to suitable maternal candidates would lead to consequences that would reshape everything. He thought he understood about loyalty, identity, and love. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the account of how a grieving father's attempt to rebuild his family according to the prevailing ideology would instead lead him to question the very foundations upon which he had built his career and his beliefs, all through the unexpected choice made by his young son. Colonel Friedrich Steiner stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with broad shoulders that filled his uniform impressively. At 44 years old, his once golden hair had silvered at the temples, giving him a distinguished appearance that complemented his sharp blue eyes and square jaw. As the head of military procurement logistics for the Eastern Territories, he managed the complex flow of supplies, equipment, and resources that supported German operations across vast distances. His position required meticulous attention to detail, unwavering loyalty, and above all, an unshakable belief in the system he served. "Klaus," he called, his voice softer than one might expect from a man of his station. "Come here, son." The boy approached cautiously. Klaus had inherited his father's height, but not his build, remaining thin and somewhat awkward as he navigated the early stages of adolescence. His mother's death from pneumonia had left him withdrawn, his normally inquisitive nature subdued by grief. "Today is important," the colonel said, placing both hands on his son's shoulders. "The ladies visiting this afternoon represent the finest families in Berlin. One of them may become your new mother. I want you to be polite, attentive, and thoughtful in your observations." "Yes, father," Klaus replied, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Look at me when I speak to you," Friedrich said firmly but not unkindly. "A Steiner man stands tall and looks the world in the eye. Your mother would expect nothing less." At the mention of his mother, Klaus lifted his gaze. Helena Steiner had been the heart of their home, a woman whose musical laughter had filled the apartment that now seemed cavernous in its silence. The boy had been devastated by her loss, but his father had insisted they must move forward, must rebuild. It was the German way, efficient, practical, resolute. "There will be 5 ladies visiting," Friedrich continued, checking his watch. "Each has been personally vetted by General Hoffmann's wife. All come from impeccable backgrounds, all understand what it means to be the wife of an officer, and all would make suitable mothers. I want you to observe them carefully. Your input will be considered." What Friedrich did not say, but what hung in the air between them, was that his son's opinion would be secondary to practical considerations. A new wife would need to understand Friedrich's position, his responsibilities, and the expectations that came with being married to a colonel in wartime Germany. She would need to maintain their social standing, manage the household with efficiency, and most importantly, provide Klaus with the maternal guidance a boy his age required. Across Berlin, in a very different apartment in the Mitte district, another preparation was underway. Elise Brenner stood before a much simpler mirror, applying a small amount of powder to her face. At 36, she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite the circumstances that had reduced her once comfortable life to one of constant vigilance and hidden truths. She had been a professor of literature at Berlin University until 3 years ago, when new regulations had made her position untenable. Now she tutored the children of wealthy families who valued education above ideology, using her extensive knowledge of German literature and history to supplement their schooling. Today's appointment was with the family of Colonel Steiner, arranged through connections that carefully obscured certain details about her background. The colonel sought a tutor for his son, who had fallen behind in his studies following his mother's death. It was a position Elise desperately needed, as her previous student's family had relocated to Switzerland the month before, leaving her without income. What neither the colonel nor his son knew was that Elise Brenner had been born Elisheva Berkowitz, the daughter of a respected physician and his wife, descendants of a Jewish family that had lived in Germany for over 200 years. Through a combination of forged documents, the assistance of old friends, and the deliberate obfuscation of her heritage, Elise had managed to remain in Berlin, hidden in plain sight. Her parents and younger sister had fled to neutral Switzerland in 1939, but Elise had stayed behind to help her elderly grandmother, who had been too frail to travel. After her grandmother had passed away, the increasing restrictions had made escape impossible. "You are simply a tutor," she reminded her reflection in a whisper. "You are going to help a boy with his studies. Nothing more." But Elise knew that entering the home of a high-ranking officer carried immense risk. One wrong word, one suspicious glance, one question too many about her background could lead to disaster. Yet the alternative, running out of money, losing her apartment, becoming visible to the authorities, seemed even more dangerous. She gathered her teaching materials, carefully curated editions of Goethe, Schiller, and other approved German classics, along with mathematics textbooks and historical atlases that had been meticulously examined to ensure they contained nothing that might raise questions. Then she put on her coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck against the February chill, and set out for Wilhelmstrasse. Back at the Steiner apartment, the first of the prospective candidates had arrived, Frau Hildegard Müller. The widow of a major who had fallen at Stalingrad sat ramrod straight on the edge of an armchair in the formal sitting room. At 38, she was precisely what General Hoffmann's wife had described: efficient, practical, and clearly accustomed to military life. Her blonde hair was arranged in a tight bun, and her conversation focused primarily on household management and the importance of discipline for young boys. "My late husband always said that a boy needs structure above all else," she informed Colonel Steiner as she accepted a cup of tea, "especially in times like these when so many influences might lead them astray." Klaus sat silently beside his father, watching Frau Müller's face as she spoke. There was nothing objectionable about her. She was reasonably attractive, clearly intelligent, and spoke with authority on matters of child-rearing. Yet Klaus felt nothing when she addressed him directly, asking about his schoolwork and his participation in youth activities. The second visitor, Fräulein Gerda Winkler, was younger at 29, the daughter of a prominent party official. She had never married but had worked as a nurse and spoke enthusiastically about modern approaches to child development. She showed more interest in Klaus himself, asking about his hobbies and interests rather than merely his academic achievements. "I believe boys should be allowed to explore their natural inclinations," she said, smiling warmly at Klaus. "Within proper guidelines, of course." Friedrich noted how his son seemed to respond more positively to this approach, sitting up straighter and actually volunteering information about his collection of model airplanes and his interest in engineering. This was the most animated Friedrich had seen the boy in months, and he made a mental note that Fräulein Winkler might be worth further consideration. The third and fourth candidates, Frau Becker, another widow with a teenage son of her own, and Frau Hoffmann, the niece of the general's wife, came and went with polite conversation but little connection. Klaus had retreated back into his shell, answering questions with minimal responses and avoiding eye contact. Friedrich felt a growing frustration. This process was necessary, practical, the right thing to do for both of them, but his son's continued resistance made it challenging. Between the fourth and fifth candidates, there was an unexpected knock at the door. The housekeeper, Frau Schmidt, announced that Fräulein Brenner, the tutor, had arrived for her appointment. "There must be some mistake," Friedrich said, checking his appointment book. "The tutor was scheduled for tomorrow." "No, Colonel. It was definitely for today at 4 o'clock, Frau Schmidt insisted. "The young lady has her confirmation letter with her." Friedrich frowned. He prided himself on his organizational skills, and such a mistake was unusual. However, with one more candidate yet to arrive, he decided to ask the tutor to wait in his study until they had concluded the social visits. "Show her in briefly so I can explain the situation," he instructed. When Elise entered the sitting room, Klaus was struck immediately by how different she seemed from the previous visitors. She wore a simple blue dress, rather than the formal attire of the potential brides, and instead of the stiff posture of women trying to impress, she moved with a natural grace that suggested comfort in her own skin. Her dark hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, and her eyes, a deep brown that reminded Klaus of the chestnuts he collected in the Tiergarten in autumn, showed curiosity and intelligence. "Colonel Steiner," she said, offering a small curtsy. "I apologize for any confusion about the appointment time." Friedrich waved away her concern. "It appears the error may have been on our side, Fräulein Brenner. However, we are in the midst of another engagement. Would you mind waiting in my study for half an hour? My son's potential new mother will be arriving shortly, and then we can discuss your tutoring position." Elise's eyes widened slightly at the mention of potential new mother, but she quickly composed herself. "Of course, Colonel, I understand completely." As Frau Schmidt led Elise toward the study, Klaus found himself watching her departure with interest. There was something about her presence that felt different, less forced, more genuine than the parade of suitable candidates his father had arranged. The fifth and final candidate, Frau Ingrid Dorner, arrived precisely on schedule. The 34-year-old widow of a diplomat was perhaps the most impressive on paper. Educated at the finest schools, conversant in 3 languages, experienced in managing a large household, and connected to the upper echelons of society. Her physical appearance matched her credentials, tall blonde with fine features and impeccable style. She spoke eloquently about the importance of maintaining cultural standards and the role of women in shaping the next generation. "A boy needs guidance toward becoming a man worthy of his nation," she said, smiling at Klaus in a way that was meant to be encouraging but felt rehearsed. "I believe in the values of tradition, duty and excellence in all things." Friedrich could see that on paper. Frau Dorner was the most suitable match. She understood his position, shared his values, and could provide Klaus with connections and opportunities that would serve him well. Yet his son had once again withdrawn, responding to her questions with monosyllabic answers and avoiding engagement. After Frau Dorner departed, Friedrich sat down beside Klaus. "Well, you've met all 5 ladies. Did any of them make an impression on you?" Klaus hesitated, then asked a question that took his father by surprise. "What about the tutor, father?" "What about her?" Friedrich asked, confused. "Could she be considered as well?" Klaus asked, his voice small but determined. Friedrich stared at his son in astonishment. "The tutor? Fräulein Brenner? She wasn't part of the candidates, Klaus. She's here to help with your studies, nothing more." "But why not?" Klaus persisted. "She seemed nice, different from the others." Friedrich sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of his son's jaw, a trait the boy had inherited from Helena. "You cannot choose a mother based on a 30-second interaction, Klaus. These things require careful consideration. The ladies you met today come from the finest families, with proper backgrounds and connections. We know nothing about Fräulein Brenner, except that she comes with good references as a tutor." "Can I at least meet her properly before you decide?" Klaus asked. Friedrich considered reprimanding his son for his impractical suggestion, but found himself reluctant to extinguish the first spark of genuine interest the boy had shown in months. "Very well. Let's speak with her about your tutoring, and you can form a more complete impression, but understand that this is not part of our search. She is here as your tutor, nothing more." They found Elise in the study, reviewing the curriculum materials she had brought. She stood when they entered, closing the book in her hands, a well-worn copy of Goethe's Faust that had belonged to her father. "Colonel Steiner, young Herr Steiner," she said with a polite nod. "Thank you for seeing me." "Please sit," Friedrich gestured. "I apologize for the unusual circumstances of your arrival. As I mentioned, we've been meeting with potential additions to our household." Elise nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "I understand, Colonel. Family is important, especially for a young man." Klaus studied her as she spoke, noting how she addressed him directly, rather than speaking about him to his father as the other women had done. There was something in her manner that reminded him of his mother, not in appearance, for Helena had been fair where Elise was dark, but in the quality of attention she offered, focused and genuine. Friedrich outlined the requirements for Klaus's education: improvement in mathematics, continued excellence in literature and history, and additional support in Latin. His mother used to oversee his studies, Friedrich explained. Since her passing, his academic performance has suffered. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Elise said, looking directly at Klaus. "It's difficult to concentrate on ordinary things when something so extraordinary has happened." Her words, simple as they were, brought an unexpected lump to Klaus's throat. None of the potential mothers had acknowledged his grief so directly. They had spoken of moving forward and establishing new routines, but none had recognized the extraordinary nature of his loss. "Yes," he managed to reply. "It is." Friedrich observed this exchange with surprise. His son had spoken more in those 2 words than in entire conversations with some of the candidates. "Perhaps you could tell us something about your background, Fräulein Brenner," Friedrich suggested, suddenly curious about this woman who had elicited an actual response from his withdrawn child. Elise maintained her composed expression despite the jolt of anxiety that ran through her at the question. She had prepared for this, had rehearsed her carefully constructed history countless times. "Of course, Colonel. I grew up in Munich, where my father was a professor of medicine. My mother taught piano. I attended the University of Berlin, studying German literature and history. I taught at several private academies before the war, and now I provide individual tutoring to students who require additional academic support." All of this was true, in its way. Her father had indeed been a professor of medicine, one of the most respected Jewish physicians in Munich, until he had been forced to flee. Her mother had taught piano to the children of both Jewish and non-Jewish families. The careful omissions and slight alterations to her history had become second nature now, a necessary survival strategy. "And your family now?" Friedrich asked, the instinctive thoroughness of his military training prompting him to seek complete information. "My parents relocated to Switzerland before the conflict began," she said, another careful truth. "My father's health required a change of climate. I remained in Berlin because I love this city and believe in the importance of continuing to educate its children, especially in challenging times." Friedrich nodded, apparently satisfied. "Your references speak highly of your methods and results. General Hoffmann's wife mentioned that you helped their nephew improve dramatically in his studies. The general's wife recommended you?" Klaus asked, surprised at this connection to the very woman who had arranged the parade of potential mothers. "Yes," Elise confirmed. "Her nephew struggled with his composition skills. We worked together for 6 months, and he showed significant improvement." What Elise did not mention was that the general's wife had never actually met her. The recommendation had come through an elaborate chain of connections, beginning with the wife of a doctor who had once worked with Elise's father and who now treated the general's family. The doctor's wife had spoken highly of a friend's daughter who tutors, and the connection had grown from there, with each person in the chain knowing only what they needed to know. As they discussed the specifics of Klaus's education, Friedrich found himself impressed by Fräulein Brenner's knowledge and approach. She spoke with authority but without condescension, asked insightful questions about Klaus's learning style and interests, and proposed a structured but flexible program that addressed his academic needs while acknowledging the emotional challenges he faced. "I believe we should begin with 3 sessions per week," she suggested. "Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoons, if that suits your schedule. We'll focus initially on rebuilding confidence in mathematics, while using his interest in engineering as motivation." "That sounds appropriate," Friedrich agreed. He noticed that Klaus was listening attentively, showing more engagement than he had in months of school reports and teacher conferences. "When can you begin?" "I'm available to start immediately," Elise replied. "Tomorrow, if that would be convenient." Friedrich consulted his calendar. "Tomorrow I have meetings until late evening. Perhaps Wednesday would be better, as I would like to be present for the first session to observe your methods." Klaus spoke up unexpectedly. "Father, couldn't Fräulein Brenner stay for dinner tonight? You said you wanted to get to know the candidates better, and if she's going to be teaching me, shouldn't you know her better too?" Friedrich raised an eyebrow at his son's unusual assertiveness. "That's not necessary, Klaus. Fräulein Brenner is here in a professional capacity, not as a dinner guest." "I wouldn't want to impose," Elise added quickly, though the invitation had caught her off guard. Dining with a colonel would not have been part of her careful plan to maintain a low profile. "Please," Klaus said, his voice taking on a quality that Friedrich recognized. The same gentle persistence Helena had used when she truly wanted something. Mother always said that breaking bread together was the best way to know someone's character. Friedrich felt a pang at the invocation of Helena's philosophy. His late wife had indeed believed in the power of shared meals to reveal true nature, often inviting his colleagues and their families to dinner to see who they really are, as she put it. Very well, he conceded, surprising himself. Fräulein Brenner, would you honor us by joining us for dinner? Nothing formal, just a simple meal. It would give us an opportunity to discuss Klaus's education further. Elise hesitated. Every instinct for self-preservation told her to politely decline, to maintain the professional distance that had kept her safe. Yet there was something in the boy's expression, a mix of hope and determination, that made refusal difficult. Additionally, establishing a good relationship with the colonel might provide a measure of protection if questions about her background ever arose. "Thank you, Colonel Steiner. I would be pleased to join you," she said, making a quick mental calculation of the risks versus benefits. One dinner, carefully navigated, should be manageable. As Frau Schmidt prepared the dining room, Friedrich excused himself to make a phone call, leaving Klaus and Elise alone in the study. "You have quite a collection of books," Elise observed, noting the well-stocked shelves that lined the walls. "They were mostly my mother's," Klaus replied, running his fingers along the spines of a set of leather-bound volumes. "She loved stories about faraway places and different times." "What was your favorite book that she shared with you?" Elise asked. Klaus pulled out a worn copy of The Odyssey, translated into German. "This one. She would read it to me before bed, a little each night. We never finished it." Elise felt a tightening in her chest at the simple tragedy contained in those words. "Perhaps we could include it in our studies," she suggested. "It would be a shame to leave Odysseus stranded before he reaches home." Klaus looked up at her with the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "You wouldn't mind?" "Not at all. Literature isn't just about analyzing text. It's about completing journeys that matter to us," she said. "Where did you and your mother leave off?" "He had just escaped from the Cyclops," Klaus replied, his eyes brightening with the memory. "Ah, so many adventures still ahead," Elise said. "The Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, Circe's Island." "You know the story well?" Klaus asked. "I do. It was one of my father's favorites as well. He said it reminded him that no matter how far from home we travel or what obstacles we face, the journey back is worth every struggle." Something in her tone made Klaus study her more carefully. "Do you miss your parents in Switzerland?" The question, innocent as it was, pierced through Elise's careful composure. It had been 3 years since she had seen her family, 3 years of wondering if they were truly safe, 3 years of carefully composed letters smuggled through neutral countries that revealed little of her actual circumstances. "Yes," she said simply, unwilling to lie to this child who knew the pain of separation. "Every day." "Does it get easier?" he asked, his voice small. "Missing someone?" Elise considered her answer carefully. "Not easier, perhaps, but different. The sharp pain becomes something else, a companion rather than an enemy. You learn to carry it with you rather than being crushed beneath it." Their conversation was interrupted by Friedrich's return. If he noticed the sudden connection between his son and the tutor, he gave no indication of it. "Dinner will be served in 15 minutes, he announced. Klaus, go wash up, please." After the boy had left, Friedrich turned to Elise. "My son seems to have taken a liking to you, Fräulein Brenner." "He's a thoughtful young man," she replied, "and he misses his mother greatly. That creates a certain sensitivity in children." Friedrich nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Helena was the heart of this family. Her loss has affected him deeply." He paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. "I'm trying to find someone who can help him move forward, provide the maternal guidance he needs." "That's understandable," Elise said carefully. "Though in my experience, children often need time and space to grieve before they can accept someone new in their lives." Friedrich considered this. "Perhaps. But life must continue, especially now. The nation requires all of us to fulfill our duties, to maintain order and purpose despite personal losses." Elise recognized the ideology behind his words, but chose not to engage with it directly. Of course, structure and routine are important for children. That's one reason why consistent tutoring can be beneficial during difficult transitions. The dinner that followed was simple by pre-war standards, but still more elaborate than what most Berliners experienced in 1943. Frau Schmidt served a soup made with vegetables from the Colonel's allotment garden, followed by a small roast with potatoes and preserved fruits for dessert. The conversation remained largely focused on Klaus's education, though Friedrich did ask Elise about her views on current literature and her experiences teaching children from military families. What struck Friedrich most was how animated Klaus became during the meal. The boy asked questions, offered opinions, and even laughed at a gentle joke Elise made about the challenges of Latin conjugation. It was as though a different child sat at the table, one who resembled the bright, engaged boy who had existed before Helena's death. After dinner, as Elise prepared to leave, Klaus asked impulsively, "Could Fräulein Brenner come to the Staatsoper with us on Saturday, Father? You said we needed to maintain cultural activities, and the Mozart performance would be educational, wouldn't it?" Friedrich looked startled by the suggestion. "Klaus, that invitation was intended for—" He stopped himself, unwilling to state explicitly that he had planned to invite one of the potential wives to accompany them. Elise quickly intervened. "That's very kind, Klaus, but I'm sure your father has other plans for your outing." "Actually," Friedrich said slowly, surprising himself, "it might be beneficial for Klaus to associate cultural experiences with his education." He turned to Elise. "If you're available and would enjoy Mozart, we would be pleased to have you join us, Fräulein Brenner." Elise hesitated. A public outing with a colonel was far more visible than a private tutoring session or even a dinner in his home. Yet refusing might seem suspicious, particularly since the invitation had been framed in educational terms. "Thank you, Colonel Steiner. I would be honored to attend," she replied, calculating that one evening at the opera presented a manageable risk, especially since such cultural events were less closely monitored than political gatherings. As Friedrich saw Elise to the door, he found himself intrigued by this educated, composed woman who had somehow connected with his withdrawn son. She did not fit the profile of the candidates General Hoffmann's wife had suggested. Her background, while respectable, lacked the political connections and social prominence he had been advised to seek. Yet there was a quiet dignity in her manner that reminded him somewhat of Helena, who had never concerned herself with status or appearances. "Until Wednesday, then," he said as she departed, "and Saturday evening for Mozart." "Yes, Colonel." "Thank you for your hospitality," Elise replied, pulling her coat tightly around her against the February chill. As she walked away from the Wilhelmstrasse apartment, Elise's mind raced with conflicting emotions. She had come seeking only employment, a means to survive in increasingly dangerous circumstances. Instead, she had found herself invited into the home and life of a German colonel and his son in a way she had never anticipated. The risk was substantial, but so was the potential protection that such a connection might provide. If she became valuable to the colonel's household, questions about her past might be overlooked or dismissed. Moreover, there was something about Klaus that touched her deeply, perhaps because he reminded her of her own nephew, now safely in Switzerland, but separated from her by war and circumstance. Or perhaps it was simply that grief created connections that transcended other boundaries, making her see the boy not as the son of a German officer, but simply as a child in pain. As Friedrich closed the door behind Fräulein Brenner, he found Klaus waiting in the hallway, an expectant expression on his face. "Well, Father, what did you think of her?" the boy asked. Friedrich considered his response carefully. "She seems competent and knowledgeable, so I believe she will be an excellent tutor for you." "But what about as a person?" Klaus persisted. "Don't you think she's nice, interesting, different from the others?" Friedrich sighed. "Klaus, I understand that you found Fräulein Brenner engaging, but you must remember that she is here to be your teacher, not to fulfill any other role in our household." "But why not?" Klaus asked, with the directness of childhood. "You said you wanted me to help choose someone who would be good for us. I choose her." Friedrich placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Life is more complicated than simple choices, son. There are considerations beyond personal preference. Duty, suitability, shared values. Fräulein Brenner comes from a different world than ours." "What does that mean?" Klaus asked, frowning. She's German, like us. She teaches German literature. How is her world different? Friedrich hesitated, unsure how to articulate the complex social and political considerations that governed such decisions. There are expectations for someone in my position, he said finally. The wife of a colonel must understand certain responsibilities, certain connections. Fräulein Brenner is an educated woman, certainly, but she lacks the background that would make her suitable as anything more than your tutor. Klaus's expression hardened in a way that reminded Friedrich painfully of Helena when she had disagreed with him but was too polite to say so directly. I think you're wrong, father, the boy said quietly. I think she's exactly what we need. With that, he turned and headed to his room, leaving Friedrich standing in the hallway, unsettled by his son's unexpected attachment to the tutor and his own conflicted response to her. There had been something genuine about Elise Brenner that had made the parade of suitable candidates seem suddenly artificial by comparison, but such thoughts were impractical, even dangerous. His position required certain choices, certain appearances. Still, as he returned to his study to complete the day's paperwork, he found himself wondering what Helena would have made of Fräulein Brenner. His practical, warm-hearted wife had always valued authenticity over status, had often seen through pretense with an unerring instinct. The truth shows itself in small moments, she used to say. You just have to be willing to see it. Friedrich shook his head to clear it of such sentimental thoughts. There was work to be done, decisions to be made. The matter of a new wife would be resolved with the same efficiency he brought to his military duties. Fräulein Brenner would be Klaus's tutor, nothing more regardless of his son's unlikely preference. Order would be maintained, life would proceed according to plan, and the disruption caused by Helena's death would be methodically repaired. Yet as he reviewed supply requisitions late into the evening, his mind kept returning to the quiet dignity in Elise Brenner's eyes and the way his son had smiled at her. The first real smile Friedrich had seen from the boy in months. Perhaps he had been too hasty in dismissing Klaus's reaction. Perhaps there was value in observing this connection further, in understanding what his son saw in this unassuming tutor that had eluded him in the carefully selected candidates. Saturday's outing to the opera would provide an opportunity for further assessment. Friedrich was, above all else, a thorough man who believed in gathering complete information before making decisions. He would watch, evaluate, and then determine the most appropriate course of action for Klaus, for their family, and for the future that stretched before them in these uncertain times. February 19th, 1943, Berlin. Light snow dusted the shoulders of Colonel Friedrich Steiner's greatcoat as he escorted Fräulein Elise Brenner up the grand steps of the Staatsoper. Klaus walked between them, unusually animated as he pointed out the neoclassical columns and elaborate friezes adorning the opera house facade. Behind the colonel's composed expression, a storm of conflicting thoughts churned. The statistical reality of the situation was impossible to ignore. Of the 5 carefully vetted candidates for his new wife, not one had elicited from his son the natural enthusiasm he now displayed toward this simple tutor. Mozart's The Magic Flute was first performed in Vienna in 1791, Elise was explaining to Klaus, just 2 months before the composer's death. It combines elements of fairy tale with deeper philosophical themes about wisdom, virtue, and the triumph of reason over superstition. My mother loved Mozart, Klaus said, his voice carrying no trace of the sadness that usually accompanied mentions of Helena. She played his piano sonatas. She said his music made difficult things seem possible. An astute observation, Elise replied with a smile that transformed her serious features. Mozart had a unique ability to express complexity through apparent simplicity. Perhaps that's why his music endures. It speaks to something essential in human experience. Friedrich found himself listening with unexpected interest. Helena had indeed loved Mozart, though he had never thought to ask why. Her explanation, as relayed by their son, revealed a depth of appreciation he had not fully recognized during their 15 years of marriage. It struck him that there were aspects of his wife he had never fully known, dimensions that perhaps his son had accessed more directly. As they entered the grand foyer, Friedrich was acutely aware of the social implications of their grouping. Already he had noted the raised eyebrows of several acquaintances who clearly wondered about the identity of the dark-haired woman accompanying the widowed colonel. It was not merely that Elise failed to match the physical ideal currently celebrated in Germany, though her dark hair and eyes certainly set her apart from the preferred aesthetic, but that there was something distinctly individual about her presence, a quality that seemed to exist independent of external validation or approval. "Colonel Steiner, what a pleasure to see you in attendance tonight." Friedrich turned to find General Hoffmann approaching, his wife on his arm. The general was a large man with a florid complexion and a manner that attempted joviality, but never quite achieved it. "General, Frau Hoffmann," Friedrich acknowledged with a precise bow. "A pleasure indeed." "And young Claustian," the general continued, nodding to the boy, "growing taller every time I see you. You'll be joining the ranks before we know it, eh?" Klaus offered a polite smile but said nothing, shrinking slightly behind Elise. Friedrich noticed this subtle movement with interest. His son, usually dutifully respectful around his superiors, seemed to be using the tutor as a buffer. "And who might this lovely lady be?" Frau Hoffmann asked, her eyes scanning Elise with the practiced assessment of a society matron. "Fräulein Elise Brenner," Friedrich introduced. "She is Klaus's new tutor. We thought tonight's performance would complement his education in German culture." "A tutor?" Frau Hoffmann repeated, her surprise evident. "How dedicated of you to include educational staff in your cultural outings, Colonel." There was a subtle emphasis on educational staff that did not escape Friedrich's notice. In their social circle, tutors, like other household employees, occupied a distinct category, respected for their function, but not typically included in family activities, particularly not public ones at the opera. "Fräulein Brenner has been most helpful in rekindling Klaus's interest in his studies," Friedrich replied smoothly. "Her knowledge of German literature and history has proven invaluable." "Yes, of course," the general's wife murmured. "I recall recommending her credentials, though I confess I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Fräulein Brenner personally before tonight." Elise maintained a composed smile, despite the sudden tension. "Your recommendation was deeply appreciated, Frau Hoffmann. The general's nephew showed remarkable improvement during our sessions together." "Did he indeed?" Frau Hoffmann replied, seeming genuinely puzzled. "How curious that Margareta never mentioned this to me directly." Friedrich registered this discrepancy immediately. If Frau Hoffmann had not personally recommended Elise, then how had her name come to him with the general's wife as a reference? Before he could pursue this question, the bells chimed, announcing that the performance would begin shortly. "We should find our seats," he said, placing a guiding hand on Klaus's shoulder. "General, Frau Hoffmann, please enjoy the performance." As they made their way to their box, Friedrich felt a new wariness toward the tutor. His military training had instilled in him a deep attention to inconsistencies, to details that didn't align properly. There was something in Elise's background that didn't quite fit, some element of her story that required closer examination. Yet as they settled into their seats and the lights dimmed, he found himself distracted from these concerns by the obvious delight on his son's face. Klaus leaned forward eagerly as the overture began, his eyes alight with an enthusiasm Friedrich had feared might never return after Helena's death. Throughout the performance, Friedrich found himself dividing his attention between the stage and the faces of his companions. Klaus was transported, completely absorbed in the music and spectacle. But it was Elise's expression that truly captured his interest. She watched with the deep appreciation of someone who understood not just the artistry, but the underlying meaning of the work. Her face reflecting each emotional shift in the music, each revelation in the story, as though experiencing it for both the first and 100th time. During intermission, as they stood in the corridor outside their box, Klaus engaged Elise in an animated discussion about the character of Papageno and his search for Papagena. "He keeps looking for the wrong things," the boy observed. "He thinks he wants gold and riches, but actually, he's looking for someone to understand him." "That's a perceptive analysis," Elise replied. "Often in stories, as in life, we believe we're searching for one thing when in fact our hearts are seeking something entirely different." "Like father," Klaus said with the startling directness of children. "He thinks he needs someone perfect and proper, But really, he just needs someone who makes our house feel like home again. Friedrich, returning with refreshments, caught only the end of this observation. "What's this about home?" he asked, handing glasses of lemonade to Klaus and Elise. "Nothing, father," Klaus replied quickly. "We were discussing the opera." Friedrich might have pressed further, but at that moment he noticed a colleague approaching, Major Werner Kleinmann from the propaganda ministry, accompanied by his wife. The Kleinmanns were known for their impeccable political connections and their vocal adherence to party ideology. Werner's position gave him considerable influence over cultural matters, including which performances received approval and which artists were permitted to perform. "Friedrich, good to see you maintaining cultural engagements despite your heavy responsibilities," Werner said, clapping him on the shoulder with forced camaraderie. "And this must be young Klaus, my, how he's grown." "Major Kleinmann, Frau Kleinmann," Friedrich acknowledged. "Yes, I believe cultural education remains essential, particularly in these times." Werner's gaze shifted to Elise, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And your companion?" "Fräulein Brenner is Klaus's tutor," Friedrich explained, aware that he was repeating this introduction for the second time that evening, and somewhat irritated by the necessity. "A tutor? At the opera?" Werner's laugh was just a shade too loud. "Next you'll be bringing your housekeeper to the symphony," Frau Kleinmann tittered politely, while shooting Elise an appraising look. "Though I suppose some educational staff do have sufficient background to appreciate such performances. Where did you study, Fräulein Brenner?" "The University of Berlin," Elise replied calmly. "I specialized in German literature under Professor Hoffmann." Werner's expression shifted. "Hoffmann, the one who resigned in '38? "Yes," Elise confirmed, maintaining her composure. "He was quite elderly when he retired." Friedrich noted the careful choice of words. Professor Hoffmann had not resigned so much as been forced out during the university purges, though the official record would indeed show a retirement. "Curious," Werner mused. "I don't recall him having many female students in his advanced seminars. The old man was rather traditional in his views on women's education, as I recall." "I was fortunate," Elise said simply. "My father was a colleague of his from medical school days. Perhaps that influenced his willingness to accept me." The conversation was interrupted by the bells announcing the end of intermission. Friedrich felt a peculiar tension as they returned to their seats, a growing awareness that Elise Brenner was navigating her interactions with extraordinary care, choosing each word with precision. It was a skill he recognized from his own military training in information security, revealing enough to satisfy immediate questions while redirecting attention from sensitive areas. The second half of the performance passed in a blur for Friedrich, his mind occupied with analyzing the inconsistencies in Elise's background. By the time they left the opera house, walking through the cold February night toward the waiting car, he had resolved to investigate further. His position gave him access to records and information channels that could quickly verify or disprove the details of her story. Yet watching his son walk beside Elise, pointing out architectural details of the buildings they passed with an animation Friedrich had feared lost forever, he felt a conflicting impulse. Whatever questions surrounded Elise Brenner's past, her effect on Klaus was undeniably positive. For the first time since Helena's death, the boy seemed fully present, engaged with the world around him, rather than withdrawn into grief. "Did you enjoy the performance, Father?" Klaus asked as they settled into the car. "Very much," Friedrich replied, though in truth he had barely registered the music or drama after intermission. "Mozart is always rewarding." "Fräulein Brenner explained the Masonic symbols to me," Klaus continued eagerly. "All the threes and the trials by fire and water. It's like a secret code inside the story." "You seem to have quite a comprehensive knowledge of the subject, Fräulein," Friedrich observed, watching Elise's reflection in the rearview mirror. "The symbolism in the magic flute is particularly rich," she replied. "It reflects the Enlightenment values that were reshaping European thought at the time, the belief in human reason, the quest for wisdom, the triumph of light over darkness." "And yet," Friedrich noted, "some might say those very Enlightenment values led to the chaos of the French Revolution and the collapse of the natural order." "Perhaps," Elise acknowledged. "Or perhaps it was not the values themselves, but their imperfect implementation that led to such outcomes. The desire for light, for understanding, for a world governed by reason rather than superstition, these seem to be enduring human aspirations, regardless of the political system in which they emerge. Friedrich was struck by the careful balance in her response, neither directly challenging the current German critique of Enlightenment thinking, nor fully endorsing it. Once again, she had navigated a potential ideological minefield with remarkable skill. When they arrived at the Steiner apartment, Friedrich surprised himself by inviting Elise in for coffee. The evening was still relatively young, and he found himself reluctant to end this rare moment of normalcy and animation in Klaus's life. As Frau Schmidt prepared coffee in the kitchen, Klaus excitedly showed Elise his collection of model airplanes, explaining the engineering differences between various designs with a technical precision that revealed hours of careful study. "This one is a Messerschmitt 109, he explained, holding up a meticulously assembled model. "It can reach speeds of 640 kilometers per hour and has a range of 850 kilometers. "That's quite impressive," Elise replied, examining the model with genuine interest. "The engineering required to achieve such performance must be extraordinary. Father says engineering will rebuild Germany after the war," Klaus continued. "He says we'll need builders more than soldiers when it's over." Friedrich, entering the room with a tray of coffee and small cakes, was surprised to hear his private thoughts repeated by his son. He had indeed expressed this view to Klaus during a rare moment of candor, though he was careful never to voice such perspectives in professional settings, where unwavering optimism about Germany's military prospects was expected. "Your father is wise," Elise said, looking up at Friedrich with an expression that seemed to see beyond his uniform to the man beneath. "Nations are ultimately built not by those who tear down, but by those who create." The simple statement, devoid of any specific political content, yet somehow deeply humane, created a moment of connection between them that Friedrich found both unsettling and compelling. There was a clarity to Elise's thinking that reminded him of discussions with colleagues before the war, when ideas could be explored for their intrinsic merit rather than their ideological conformity. The evening continued with conversation about music, literature, and Klaus's studies. Friedrich observed how Elise drew his son out, encouraging him to articulate his thoughts more fully, challenging him to consider alternative perspectives without ever making him feel inadequate. It was masterful teaching, the kind that recognized the individual mind and spirit of the student and nurtured it toward greater understanding. By the time Elise prepared to leave, Friedrich had made a decision. He would investigate her background. His position and responsibility demanded it, but he would do so discreetly, without disrupting Klaus's tutoring sessions, unless he discovered something that posed genuine concern. "I'll have my driver take you home," he said, as Elise gathered her coat and gloves. "That's very kind, but unnecessary," she replied. "I live quite near the Friedrichstrasse station. The walk is pleasant even in winter." "I insist," Friedrich said firmly. "It's late, and the blackout makes navigation difficult." Something in his tone must have communicated that this was not merely courtesy, but a decision made, for Elise nodded her acceptance without further protest. As they waited for the driver to bring the car around, Klaus surprised them both by asking, "Could Fräulein Brenner come with us to grandmother's birthday next weekend, Father? She could help me with my recitation of Schiller. I want it to be perfect." Friedrich saw the flash of alarm in Elise's eyes before she carefully composed her expression. His mother's birthday celebration would include numerous high-ranking officers and their families, a much more scrutinized social setting than even the opera. "I'm afraid that wouldn't be appropriate, Klaus," he said gently. "Fräulein Brenner has her own obligations, and grandmother's gathering is family only." The disappointment on his son's face was palpable, but Friedrich held firm. There were boundaries that needed to be maintained, particularly as his own uncertainty about Elise's background remained unresolved. After Elise had departed, Friedrich spent several hours in his study, reviewing her employment paperwork and making notes of details to verify. The next morning, he placed several discreet inquiries through channels available to him as a colonel in military logistics. The results, which began arriving over the following days, presented a curious pattern. On the surface, everything checked out. There was indeed an Elise Brenner who had attended the University of Berlin studying German literature. Her father had been a professor of medicine in Munich. Her current address in Berlin was registered properly, her ration cards in order, her identity documents complete. Yet there were small discrepancies that nagged at Friedrich's methodical mind. The university records showed her graduation date as 1934, but there was no record of her employment at any educational institution until 1939. Her father's academic record in Munich ended abruptly in 1938 with no explanation or subsequent appointment. And most curiously, when Friedrich attempted to obtain information about her family in Switzerland, he found only the vaguest confirmations of their residence, with no specific location or contact information available. These were not glaring inconsistencies. Indeed, in the chaos of war and changing administrations, such gaps in records were not uncommon. But combined with the confusion over Frau Hoffmann's recommendation, they created a picture that was not quite clear, not fully transparent. Meanwhile, Klaus's tutoring sessions with Elise continued 3 times weekly, and Friedrich observed a remarkable transformation in his son. The boy's academic performance improved dramatically, but more significantly, his engagement with the world around him blossomed. He began to speak about the future again, to make plans, to express interests and opinions with the confidence that had characterized him before Helena's death. Friedrich found himself in the unprecedented position of placing his son's well-being above absolute certainty regarding Elise's background. He continued his inquiries, but did so with increasing discretion and decreasing urgency. Whatever questions surrounded Elise Brenner, her effect on Klaus was undeniably beneficial. The situation might have continued in this tentative balance indefinitely had it not been for an unexpected development in late March. Friedrich returned home early one afternoon, having been granted rare leave due to his exemplary handling of a complex supply chain issue in the Eastern Territories. He had not informed the household of his early arrival, intending to surprise Klaus and perhaps use the additional time to review some personal correspondence that had been neglected during his recent heavy workload. As he approached the study where Klaus and Elise conducted their lessons, he heard the sound of his son's voice not reciting Latin conjugations or historical dates, but speaking Hebrew. Friedrich froze, his hand halfway to the door handle. There was no mistaking the ancient language. He had heard it once during a diplomatic function before the war, when an international delegation had included scholars from Palestine. Klaus was struggling with the pronunciation, and Elise was gently correcting him, her own command of the language clearly fluent. "Like this," she was saying. "Shalom Aleichem. It means peace be upon you." "Shalom Aleichem," Klaus repeated, his pronunciation improving. "And the answer is Aleichem Shalom, right? Upon you be peace." "Exactly," Elise confirmed. "It's one of the oldest greetings in human history, used for thousands of years." "Why is it important to know these words?" Klaus asked. "Father says we should focus on modern languages with practical applications." There was a pause, and Friedrich found himself holding his breath, waiting for Elise's response. "Understanding ancient languages helps us see the connections between cultures," she said finally. "The words we speak today have roots that reach deep into human history. When we learn those roots, we discover that people who seem very different from us often share the same fundamental hopes and fears, the same basic humanity." "Like the Jewish people Father talks about?" Klaus asked, his innocent question landing like a physical blow in Friedrich's chest. Another pause, longer this time. "Yes," Elise said, her voice careful but firm. "Like the Jewish people. Father says they're different from us," Klaus continued. "But the words you're teaching me don't seem so different. They're about peace, just like we want." "People are more alike than different, Klaus," Elise replied. "Sometimes we focus on the differences because they're easier to see, or because we've been told to look for them. But if you look deeper, beneath language and custom and appearance, you find the same human heart." Friedrich stood motionless outside the door, a storm of conflicting emotions surging through him. The realization that Elise was Jewish seemed to crash over him with absolute certainty, explaining all the small inconsistencies in her background. His training and duty demanded immediate action. Report her? have her identity verified, allow the proper authorities to handle the situation. Yet alongside this ingrained response rose another, equally powerful reaction. This woman had brought his son back to life after months of withdrawn grief. She had taught him not just academic subjects, but a way of seeing the world with curiosity and compassion, and now she was teaching him something that Friedrich himself had begun to question privately. The ideology that divided humanity into categories of worth based on ancestry and belief. Before he could resolve this conflict, he heard movement within the study. Acting on instinct, Friedrich retreated to the foyer, making a show of entering the apartment with deliberate noise, calling out to announce his presence. By the time he reached the study door, Elise and Klaus were reviewing a Latin text, all evidence of the Hebrew lesson carefully hidden away. "Father," Klaus exclaimed, genuinely delighted by the unexpected appearance. "You're home early." "A rare reward for completing a difficult assignment," Friedrich explained, watching Elise carefully for any sign of awareness or alarm. Her expression remained composed, though he thought he detected a slight tension in her posture. "Fräulein Brenner has been helping me understand Cicero," Klaus continued excitedly. "Did you know he wrote about natural law that applies to everyone regardless of where they come from?" "Is that so?" Friedrich replied, his eyes still on Elise. "That sounds like a fascinating philosophical concept." "It was revolutionary for its time," Elise said, her voice steady despite what must have been enormous internal tension. "The idea that certain principles of justice transcend cultural boundaries and apply to all human beings equally." The conversation continued in this vein, with no acknowledgement of what Friedrich had overheard or what Elise might suspect. When the lesson concluded, Friedrich walked Elise to the door as usual. "Klaus has made remarkable progress," she observed. "His natural intelligence is blossoming again." "Yes," Friedrich agreed. "He seems to have found his way back to himself." He paused, then added quietly, "You've been good for him." "Fräulein Brenner, better than I could have anticipated." Something in his tone must have alerted her, for she looked up at him with sudden intensity, searching his face for some indication of his meaning. Friedrich maintained a neutral expression, not yet ready to reveal what he knew or had guessed. "Thank you, Colonel," she said finally. "That means a great deal to me." After she had gone, Friedrich spent hours in his study, reviewing everything he knew about Elise Brenner, weighing his duty against the evidence of his own eyes and the transformation in his son. By morning, he had made his decision. He arranged a private meeting with Elise, requesting that she arrive an hour before Klaus's regular lesson. When she entered his study, her composure was intact, but her eyes were wary, aware that something had changed. "Please sit, Fräulein Brenner," Friedrich said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Or perhaps I should say, Fräulein Berkowitz." The color drained from her face, but she did not attempt to deny it. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "With certainty. Only since yesterday," he replied. "Though I've had questions for some time. Your background contains small inconsistencies that might escape casual examination, but not a military logistician's attention to detail." "And now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear that must have been coursing through her. "What do you intend to do with this information?" Friedrich studied her for a long moment. "That depends," he said finally, "on your answers to several questions." "I understand," she replied, folding her hands in her lap to disguise their trembling. "Why did you take the position here, knowing the risk?" he asked. "Was it simply financial necessity, or was there another purpose?" "Financial necessity was the primary reason," she admitted. "My previous student's family left for Switzerland, and I needed employment to survive. But once I met Klaus," she paused, choosing her words with care. "Once I saw his grief, his intelligence, his need for someone to truly see him rather than simply manage him. I stayed because I believed I could help him, and perhaps in helping him, find some purpose in remaining in Berlin when so many have fled or been taken away." Friedrich nodded slowly. "You've taught him Hebrew." "Yes," she acknowledged. "That was perhaps unwise." But he asked about ancient languages, about the origins of words. It seemed a natural extension of his curiosity. You've taught him ideas that contradict the official ideology, Friedrich continued. I've taught him to think, she corrected gently, to question, to seek understanding rather than merely accepting what he's told, as any good teacher would do. Even when such questioning could be dangerous, Friedrich pressed. Elise met his gaze directly. Especially then, she said simply. Friedrich rose from his desk and moved to the window, looking out at the Berlin street below, where people moved about their business under the watchful eyes of uniformed patrols. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more reflective. My wife, Helena, once told me something that I've been thinking about since her death. She said that systems built on fear eventually collapse under the weight of their own contradictions, that truth can be hidden or suppressed, but never truly eliminated. He turned back to face Elise. I did not fully understand her meaning at the time. Perhaps I wasn't ready to. And now, Elise asked, now I see a woman who has risked everything to continue teaching, to maintain her humanity in inhuman circumstances. I see my son who has found his way back from grief through your guidance, and I find myself unable to reconcile these realities with the ideology I've served. Elise remained silent, waiting for him to continue, to declare his intentions. I will not report you, Friedrich said finally, but your position here is untenable in the long term. Sooner or later, others will notice the same inconsistencies I did, will ask the same questions. Berlin is becoming more dangerous by the day for people in your situation. I know, she acknowledged, but leaving is nearly impossible now. The borders are closed, travel permits almost unobtainable, especially for people like me. Friedrich returned to his desk and unlocked a drawer, removing several official documents. Nearly impossible, he agreed, but not entirely so for someone with the right connections and paperwork. Elise stared at the documents he placed before her. Travel permits, identity papers, official authorizations bearing stamps and signatures that could open borders and create passage where none existed for ordinary citizens. Why would you do this? She whispered. For Klaus, Friedrich said, then corrected himself. No, not only for him. For Helena, who would have made this choice without hesitation. And perhaps for myself, to discover if I can still act according to conscience rather than merely following orders. These papers, Elise began, examining them more closely. There are 3 sets. Yes, Friedrich confirmed. For you, for Klaus, and for myself. You're coming with us? Elise asked. Stunned by this revelation. If you'll have us in, he replied. Klaus has chosen you, Elise, not as a tutor but as the person he wants in his life. I've fought against this reality, tried to maintain the distinctions and boundaries that my position demands, but in doing so, I've denied what has become increasingly clear, that you represent the qualities Helena valued most: integrity, compassion, the courage to live according to one's deepest principles. Elise's expression reflected her struggle to comprehend the enormity of what he was proposing. You would leave everything, your position, your country, your... She hesitated, then finished. Your beliefs. My beliefs have been changing for longer than I've acknowledged, Friedrich admitted. Each supply report, each set of production figures, each strategic assessment has told the same story. This war cannot be won. Germany is facing defeat, and when it comes, those most closely associated with the current regime will face consequences I do not wish my son to witness or endure. He moved around the desk to stand before her, no longer the colonel addressing a subordinate, but simply a man speaking to a woman who had come to mean far more to him than he had anticipated. I am not asking you to be a replacement for Helena, he said quietly. That would dishonor both you and her memory. I am asking if you would consider a new beginning, for Klaus, for yourself, and yes, for me as well. Not as a colonel and a tutor, not as categories in an ideological system, but as 2 people who have found something unexpected amidst the chaos of war. Elise looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. When? She asked simply. Tonight, Friedrich replied. A military transport to Switzerland leaves at midnight. I've arranged for us to be on it, listed as a colonel escorting his son and the boy's governess to a specialized medical facility for treatment unavailable in Berlin. The paperwork will withstand scrutiny, but we must move quickly and leave almost everything behind. Elise rose to her feet, standing before him with a quiet dignity that humbled him. "I need to send word to my family," she said, "to let them know we're coming." "It's arranged," Friedrich assured her. "A telegram has been sent through military channels to the contact information you provided when you were hired. Your parents will be notified of your arrival." The enormity of what they were undertaking hung in the air between them. The risk, the irrevocable nature of the choice, the uncertain future that awaited them. And yet, within that uncertainty lay a freedom neither had thought possible in the Germany of 1943. "I'll be ready," Elise said finally. "And Friedrich? Thank you for seeing me, truly seeing me, beyond the labels and categories." "It is I who should thank you," he replied, "for helping me remember what Helena always knew, that humanity transcends the artificial boundaries we create to divide us." That night, as the military transport rumbled toward the Swiss border, Klaus slept between them, his head resting against Elise's shoulder. Friedrich watched them in the dim light, marveling at the chain of events that had led to this moment. His son, told to choose a new mother among women who embodied the official ideal, had instead recognized the authentic humanity in a woman forced to hide her true identity. And in doing so, he had led his father toward a truth that no amount of propaganda or indoctrination could erase. That connection, compassion, and courage existed beyond ideological boundaries. As they crossed into Swiss territory in the early hours of the morning, Friedrich felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The future remained uncertain, full of challenges they would face as the war continued to reshape Europe. But for the first time since Helena's death, he felt a sense of rightness, of alignment between his actions and his deepest values. Elise, feeling his gaze upon her, looked up and offered a small, tired smile. There would be time later for discussions, for planning, for determining exactly what shape their shared life might take. For now it was enough to have escaped, to have chosen human connection over ideological division, to have found an unexpected family in the midst of a world tearing itself apart. As dawn broke over the Swiss landscape, Klaus stirred and opened his eyes, looking first at Elise, then at his father. "Are we home yet?" he asked sleepily. Friedrich exchanged a glance with Elise before answering. "Not yet," he said gently, "but we're on our way." And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.